Today we'll be kicking it back with some good old paranormal stories, Ouija boards, haunted houses, and even a haunted dorm room. A huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to support it with a like and a comment letting me know your thoughts. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. It had been a fun night in the finally warmer nights of the Canadian winter. Anna, a close friend of mine since the 6th grade, had thrown a party in the bushes at a fire pit with around 50 or so people having gone. I went with Elena and Vivian, and was planning to go to Elena's house after. The night itself had been a disaster, with Anna's phone being stolen and thrown in the lake, fights breaking out, and Vivian and I losing Elena for a good 40 minutes when she went on a walk in the forest with some mutual friends. So when we piled into Elena's mom's car, I was tipsy and exhausted. The important thing to note here is I only had around 2 or 3 coolers over a 5-hour period, and I am not too bad of a lightweight. We drove to Elena's chattering and excited from the night we had, talking to her older sister Haley. We got downstairs and played some music before we began to get bored, when suddenly Elena walked over to her closet and pulled out a Ouija board. "So guys, you want to kick tonight up a notch?" Now, normally I would have said no, having lived in a house in my youth that we later discovered was previously inhabited by Satan worshippers, and being followed by entities up until now. I know not to mess with this kind of stuff, but I let my young stupidity get ahead of me. So when she asked, I readjusted myself before saying, "Yeah, sure." Elena, Viv, and I crowded around the board, while Haley sat by the bed in a computer chair, scrolling through her phone. I don't know what it is, but whenever Haley's in the room, they go crazy. Just watch. Elena glanced over to her sister, who looked up and smiled, bemused by our activity. She set the board down gently and placed the planchette on it, pulling her dark hair into a high bun with her pink velvet scrunchie that she always kept on her person. Viv gave an excited but scared breath before placing her fingers on. "Is there anyone here with us?" Elena asked loudly. The planchette didn't move for several seconds before jerking to say yes. Viv squealed and we both laughed in shock before turning back to the board. "Are you the ghost who haunts this house?" The planchette moved to say no. "Okay, Elena, you're moving it." Viv gave her a playful glare before Elena took her fingers off slightly to prove it was still moving. We became slightly more somber as we continued. We asked a few more filler questions before the planchette began to drag our fingers to Z-O, Z-O, Z-O. "Stop," Elena commanded in a stern voice, and the planchette stopped and allowed us to center it. "Zozo is the Ouija board demon. If this is them, then we need to say goodbye." I gave Elena a nervous look, feeling a pit begin to form in my stomach. "No, it's just a prankster spirit trying to mess with us. It's fine, don't worry." The board spelled out Zozo a few more times, and even Momo as he is also referred to as. But we asked a few more questions before Elena grew bored, and said goodbye. We let go of the board with Viv and I giving each other wide eyes, and disbelieving looks. I'm literally shaking right now. Did that really just happen? Viv let out a shaky breath, blue eyes wide with disbelief, while we both sat excited but terrified. We resumed listening to music and talking before Elena grabbed the board again. We once more began to ask random questions to the board. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to, but at one point I asked, "How did you die?" And instead of answering, it spelled out Momo once more. Elena took over the line of questioning from there. "Did you like Viv's presence?" she asked, while the planchette shot to yes. "Do you like Haley's presence?" Once again, yes. "Do you like my presence?" It hesitated for a brief moment before going to yes. "How about, do you like Allison's presence?" My eyes snapped up hearing my name. The board sat still for almost a full minute before saying no. What did I do? I pouted, though inwardly I was terrified. The board began to spell Zozo again, before Elena said a stern stop, and it became still once more. I told you, it's a trickster. Elena decided to ask again, do you like Allison's presence? The planchette immediately slid to yes. She once again grew tired of the board, so we put it back in the box. Though this time I had decided to have one more cooler, and once we finished the game my chest began to feel tight, like something was cutting off my airway. I can't breathe. My chest feels constricted. I had begun to gasp for air, but my friends chalked it up to me being overdramatic. I left and went to the bathroom, calling my boyfriend and leaving a message that I loved him, since it was 3 a.m. and he was asleep, before dropping to the floor and finding it even harder to breathe. I walked back into Elena's room after a few seconds and said, something isn't right. You either need to call my mom or an ambulance right now. I can't breathe. I got into the bed, and they began to become concerned. Viv helped me get off my sweatshirt, as I was way too warm. Come lie on the floor and put one arm under your head. It should help you get some airflow. Haley helped me put my arm up. I was getting progressively worse. I became extremely cold and started to shake and cry. I was still gasping for air, and according to them I had become sheet white. Can you open your eyes for me, hun? Can you look at me, please? Haley sat next to me with her phone flashlight in hand. I can't focus on anything. I can't open my eyes. I whimpered, becoming increasingly more panicked. You can. You're doing really good, okay? Haley used a calm and reassuring voice, while helping me turn towards her. I somehow got my eyes open with some difficulty, and she shined the light into them, watching me intently. Her pupils aren't responding. I'm gonna have to call an ambulance. The ambulance got there a bit later, and they checked me out and took me to the hospital. I told them about having a little bit of alcohol through the night, and they couldn't figure out what had happened and chalked it up to a panic attack. The worst part was having to call my mom from the ER at 4 a.m., but she was very supportive, and not really too mad at all. I had to wait until about 8 a.m. to see a doctor, and I ended up falling asleep. When I woke up, I had no idea what was happening, and felt very confused for a bit before recalling the earlier events. I was released, and the next day I threw up 3 times, which had never happened before the morning after, especially having had so little to drink through the night. But long story short, I will never be touching a Ouija board again, and I'm still terrified of drinking from it. Stay away from Ouija boards. They are serious. They aren't a game. Leave the dead where they are. Dead. And if you ever contact an entity named Zozo, say goodbye immediately. I guess I should start somewhat at the beginning. You see, this house is also the house my father grew up in with his parents, and my grandfather grew up in with his parents. I'm not sure how many generations this house has belonged to my paternal family, but this house is old. It's a 3-story townhouse, stood alone, across the road from an even older church in a small village about 3 or 4 miles from the nearest big town. I did not grow up in this house. My father despised this place. Out of the very long list of things he detested, this house was up there in the top 5. That's why I was so surprised he moved into it when he and my mom divorced. He always said that he would rather live on the streets than return here. When both his mother and father died, the house was naturally left to him. An only child of an only child. My dad wasn't just an only child, but a very lonely one. His father was quite frankly disinterested in him, and his mother was nothing short of vile to him. So when they died and all that was left was the house, I expected Dad to either demolish the place or sell it. He said it would cost too much to renovate the place to make it suitable to live in, and too much to turn to rubble. Now, Dad had a lot of demons trapped in his head. He would drink himself to oblivion in a vain hope to forget his childhood, to no avail. It was really very sad to witness. He had a good, well-paying job, at a manufacturing company as the head of the engineering department, and Mom worked for an out-of-hours doctor's practice, often working nights. They were two passing ships in the night, and unfortunately, it was me that had to take care of Dad when he was too drunk to take care of himself. Mom knew nothing of his drinking problem, and to this day she still doesn't know the full extent of it all. They divorced when I was 13. I never, ever stayed overnight with my dad. He wouldn't allow it. He would always tell Mom that he would take me out for the day, but he couldn't let me into the house. So naturally, our relationship thinned. By the time I was 23, our relationship consisted of drunken phone calls at ridiculous hours, and me talking him off the edge of whatever rim he was close to throwing himself off of. And I'd had enough. I was pregnant with my oldest child, single, in a 2-bed flat. The last thing I needed was to be a parent to my parents, on top of a tiny human totally dependent on me. So I told him, everything he put me through, I didn't deserve it. I hated him for it. Hated him more than he hated his house, and to not contact me again unless he got sober. He had gotten progressively worse over the years, you see. He went from a binge drinker, to a high-functioning alcoholic, to a regular alcoholic, and drinking away his redundancy and life savings. That was the last time I spoke to him. He died a little over 6 months ago by suicide. I cannot express to you how awful I feel now. I wish I had reached out when my son was born. And again when my daughter was born 3 years later. And last year when I got married to the love of my life. I wish he could have shared in my happiness and been a grandfather. He was found after one of his many girlfriends couldn't get a response from him. He had only been dead 3 days, and was found. Empty whiskey bottles strewn all over the house, and 14 empty packets of codeine. Stained with blood and vomit, and God knows what else. He had a small funeral with only 3 guests including the priest. He has a pauper's grave next to his parents, in the graveyard at the church opposite. The first I knew about it was when I got a phone call from a solicitor. I was the only beneficiary in his will, and I got this house. He had nothing else to leave me. What money he had left paid off his debts and his funeral. I really didn't want to move here. It was my husband who convinced me. We were living in my small 2-bed flat that I had been living in since I fell pregnant the first time around. We had been saving as hard as possible to buy a house instead of renting, but it was proving difficult. We have 2 kids together who share a room, and had no garden at the flat. The house would be perfect for us. It took a while, but eventually I had to agree. The village wasn't too far from the town the kids went to school in. We both drove, no mortgage or rent, and for all it was rural, it wasn't too far out for us to still get to work with minimal hassle. And I thought, maybe a way of making some kind of peace with my dad. When we first came here to see the house, it was bare. Everything had been removed. By who, I couldn't tell you. But a raging alcoholic he may have been. But the old man was still an engineer at heart. Maybe he hadn't drank all his savings. It looked like a show home when we first stepped foot inside, although cold and dusty, and in need of a good cleanup. The floor was hardwood throughout downstairs, with a large open-plan living room, diner, and kitchen, with beautiful patio doors that opened up into a large, though unkept, garden, with high walls for privacy. The second floor was 3 ample-sized bedrooms with a modern bathroom, and on the 3rd floor is the master bedroom, with an even bigger bathroom. It truly does look beautiful, and the perfect family home, even before we cleaned it up. We've been here officially 2 weeks. We spent a month cleaning and moving things in. The money we had saved ourselves we used to decorate and lay carpets. Carpets I was insistent on for the living room. Thankfully the kids didn't notice it in their excitement. In the middle of the living space was a sickeningly big, brownish red stain, set against the dark wooden floor. You'd be forgiven for thinking that it was just a watermark in the wood, but I knew immediately what it was. This was where Dad was found, where he spent his final moments. I didn't want a constant reminder of that staring me in the face. Even placing a decent-sized rug wouldn't cover it. You'd think that would be enough for me to hightail it straight out of here. But by this point, we had nowhere left to go. Mom couldn't take us all in. She simply didn't have the space. We already signed off on the flats, and that had a person waiting to move in at the end of the month. I can't believe I've been this stupid. Everything has told me not to come here. Every instinct, every sign, and yet, here I sit on my patio, phone in one hand and a gin in the other, letting it all out into the ether of the internet. To make matters worse, my husband has been offered a new job, one that requires him to be away from home for up to 6 weeks at a time. The money is too good to pass up, but I don't want to be alone here. He's packing his bag now to fly out tomorrow afternoon. In the 2 weeks since we've been in this stupid house, so much and yet so little has happened. The very first day we arrived, ready to get comfortable and spend our first night, no less than 6 birds flew straight into the patio doors and broke their necks. We put it down to us not having anything up at the doors to inform the birds that there was an invisible barrier there. Now I'm taking it as a warning number 1. That same night, I woke up because a faceless someone was screaming in my ear. I put it down to a nightmare at the time. Now I think that was warning number 2. 3 days passed by without much incident. Maybe the odd bump in the night or the sound of a door creaking shut upstairs, but nothing that couldn't be explained away. On day 4, I had a long soak in the bath. I went to put my engagement and wedding ring back on afterwards to find they weren't where I left them at the sink. I found them on day 6 under my dresser. Every day something happens. My wedding photo has gone missing. My favorite perfume has vanished too. I constantly feel like I'm being watched. All the time the hairs on the back of my neck tingle and radiate down my back. I keep seeing blacker than black shadows in the dark corners of our house. I blink and they're gone. Doors are left open when I know I shut them, and vice versa. Specifically, the built-in wardrobe in our bedroom is always ajar, even when I know as fact that I closed it until it clicks, several times, every single day. Today has been the worst. I'm not sleeping well at all. I always feel on edge and uneasy. I'm snapping at the kids and at Gavin. The final straw came when, after putting the 2 little ones in bed, I came out of my daughter's bedroom when something caught my eye. I don't know what it was. I can't explain it. It looked like a person, but not. All I remember is 2 electric blue eyes and then falling. I almost felt like I was floating on top of invisible water. If it wasn't for the tightening in my stomach, it would have been a pleasant feeling, in honesty. Then there was a white flash in my eyes, and a searing pain shot through my entire head. I felt the blood rush into my face, and heard a ringing in my ears before the very breath was forced from my lungs, as the back of my ribcage landed with force against the cast iron banister. At the bottom of the staircase, with a nice goose egg forming on the back of my skull, and a bruised back, I rubbed the bright spots from my eyes, and looked back up to the top of the staircase, and there was nothing there. Nothing at all. And still, I had a sense that I was being stared at, just being watched all the time. Apparently I screamed, and Gavin came running to find me in a heap clutching the back of my head. The kids started crying because they had heard their mama scream so loud. They're asleep now after many reassurances that I'm fine. I haven't told Gavin about the eyes. He found a bright red, very unmissable toy car at the top of the stairs, and told me to be more careful after handing me a water and some ibuprofen. That toy car was not there. I know it wasn't, but I can't disprove it, can I? And how would I sound to him if I told him everything I've felt and seen? Most, if not all of it, can be explained away using logic and science. I misplaced my rings. I may have not unpacked the wedding photo. My perfume is probably hidden amongst our daughter's little treasures, and I tripped over a toy car, obviously. But those eyes that I feel are the eyes that are watching me, I can't get them out of my head. My mom is visiting tomorrow, and taking both the children for a holiday as the school has broken up for the Easter break. Then I will be alone, as of 4 o'clock tomorrow. I will be truly alone in this heap of wood, and stone, and glass. At least I think I'll be alone. No, I will be. I will be. I just need to document everything, so I know I can read it back and make sense of it all. What am I going to do? Most of my friends were joyfully attending their first year at uni. I wasn't the case. I wasn't feeling the glee nor the joy. I like to reckon it was because I was just fearful and scared to leave what I called home. I thought it was terror and fear of something new and undiscovered, but now I truly believe it may have been something else entirely. A force that kept whispering me not to go. A force that knew what was about to happen and tried to protect me. I hushed the voice inside my head each time I heard it, and ignored what it was telling me. I did what we were all taught to do. I ignored my gut feeling, my instincts. The reasoning is well above it, right? Or at least, that is what we've been told. Since that horrific night, I don't even know what to believe anymore. However, back then, I reassured myself that I was just feeling anxious and uncomfortable about leaving home and finally becoming an independent adult. Iron-fisted, I decided to leave my nest and face my biggest fear, growing up, and left both my safety and my nest. My family wasn't able to accompany me to the town I was headed to, so a friend of mine, who was also heading there, offered to give me a ride. It was a bright, sunny day when we took off. However, as soon as we entered the city, all the colors started to fade. All the houses seemed to become grayer and grayer, and the day suddenly turned gloomy. The gray houses were surrounded by withering grass and naked branched trees. The streets were so empty, with only a couple of people strolling on the pathways now and then. What was peculiar about them was the way they strolled slowly, as if their bones were extremely heavy, or they had some kind of weight pressed against their chest. The closer I looked, the more they resembled walking corpses. Their appearance was so elderly. Their sunken faces with pointy cheekbones were emotionless. Even though they weren't old, they looked so tired and dead. They had no life ignited in them. I tried to distract myself from the disturbing images I was seeing, but as soon as I looked away, the voice in my head started shouting at me again, telling me not to go there. I glanced at my friend, but she didn't seem disturbed at all. Quite the contrary. She seemed rather peaceful and calm, as if she wasn't seeing the same scenery which I was observing. After driving what felt like an eternity to me, but was actually around 20 minutes, we arrived at the dormitory where we were supposed to stay for the next few years of our studies. The building itself was actually magnificent. It was renovated recently, so its antique features really stood out. It was grand and beautiful. Nevertheless, it still had an eerie note to it. I shrugged the uncanny feeling off and entered the building. I was assigned the room 244. I was rather disappointed with the news because I knew it was a double room, hence I needed to share it with someone, and that wasn't something I was looking forward to since I enjoy to have time to myself. I went towards my room, and as soon as I unlocked the huge, creaky old door, I shivered. I don't even know how to describe the cold I felt. It was unnatural and unbearable. I wanted to turn around and run away immediately. That's how odd it felt. It was the feeling you feel when you just know something bad is about to happen. When you just know something doesn't feel right. Eventually, I forced myself to shrug it off once again, and entered what was going to be my home. I met Emily, my roommate, who was quite fun to be around. She made the room feel a lot warmer than it truly was, and for a couple of months, everything felt normal again. However, one day after my classes, I returned back to our room, only to find it empty. Emily left without having said a single word. The room was so clean and empty, as if I never had a roommate in the first place. That's when I started to notice how strange that room was once again. I was always feeling as if someone was watching me, as if I was never alone. I'd often turn myself around trying to catch who was staring at me, even though there was nobody in the room, because I felt someone's gaze pierce my back. After a month or so, I convinced myself I was crazy, and that I was making it all up, because feeling a certain way never really is proof of anything. I continued to lead a normal life for a month, and everything was normal indeed, except the uncanny and uneasy atmosphere I felt in the room all of the time. After some time, you get used to it. Everything was normal up until then. It was a night like any other. I was reading a book and listening to some music when I decided to call it a night. I stood up and turned off the lights. As soon as I was surrounded by pitch black, I ran towards my bed, because of the presence I felt right behind me. At that point, all of that was just a normal night to me. I slept safe and sound, only to be awakened by my body aching painfully. I was out of air and breath, and out of panic, I grabbed my phone quickly, trying to light up the room only to see the phone showing 3:33 a.m. Terrified, I jumped out of bed and ran towards the bathroom where I locked myself in. After trying to calm myself down, my body still hurt very much, so I decided to examine it. I took my pajamas off only to realize I was covered in large, bloody scratches. I was mortified. I stayed in the bathroom until dawn, because I was so terrified I couldn't move. After that night I switched dormitories, and am still afraid of the dark. This is the first time I'm talking about it. I hope to learn more about what I faced that night. At the end of the street stands a house that is older than most houses in our town. It's worn down and weathered, and no one has resided there in over a decade. To the locals, it's known as the widow's house, because the old lady that lived there years ago lived there alone. The husband died at a young age. He was a fisherman, lost at sea. Growing up, we were told to stay away from the house because it was a death trap. Inside, the walls were falling down due to rot, and the ceiling is water-stained and full of mold. So it was understandable why parents didn't want their children playing around inside. If you ask some of the elders in town, though, you would get a different story. You would be told a story about missing children, and how their disappearance was somehow linked to that house. The elders say that the widow lured children into her home because she was lonely and wanted company, and that when the children would try to leave, she would kill them. I asked my parents about this story and they assured me that it was wise tales the elders made up to scare the children, so they would stay away from the house. Even if the stories about the missing children aren't true, I still get chills whenever I walk by it. There's something unnatural about the house, something dark, and I think that if the walls of the house could talk, they'd have some nightmares to tell. When I was 12, my friends and I were up late playing Spotlights on a Saturday night. We were playing in my backyard, and it was just about midnight, and we were starting to get bored. Just as we were about to call it a night and head home, one of my friends came up with the brilliant idea that we would break into the widow's house and explore inside. One of the guys in the group tried to convince us it was a bad idea, and that our parents would be mad if they caught us in there. Being young and stupid though, we chose to go against our better judgment. We walked up the street, and as we got closer, the moon was illuminating perfectly down on the house. From a distance, you could easily distinguish the worn down place, and there was denying that it was abandoned. As we got closer, I started to feel this uneasy feeling go down my spine. I was convinced that the rest of the group did too, but we were all too afraid to admit it, because we didn't want to risk being made fun of. We were now standing in front of the house, waiting for one of us to work up enough courage to open the garden gates. The gate was once iron, but you wouldn't be able to tell now with all the rust and corrosion. I put one hand forward to try and seem brave and impress my friends. I slowly pushed the gate open with my left hand, and as I did, the gate let out a creaking noise that made us all jump. We all looked at each other and burst into a fit of laughter. I have to admit, that very moment I was petrified with fear, but I couldn't let it show. Maybe it was because it was the dead of night, but then again the place scared me in broad daylight too. We started to walk into the front garden, huddled close to one another. We were now at the front door, and all I could think about was the stories that the elders used to tell us. The door was stiff and hard to open. The hinges were old and needed to be oiled, but we managed to push it open far enough for us to all squeeze in through, and into the entrance. We were now standing inside the house in the foyer for the first time. Once inside, I thought to myself it wasn't as bad as I imagined, and that it was like any other house, minus the rotten walls and damp smell. One of my friends turned on the flashlight, that we had previously been using for our game of Spotlight. With a push of a button, the room was now full of light. We started to explore the house, and we noticed that everything was left in place. When the widow died, no one packed up her belongings, because she didn't have any living relatives to do so. Thinking of this made me sad for the widow, because one thing the elders got right was that she must have been lonely. Even at 10 years, 12 years old, the thought of living alone for years on end made me depressed. Deep in my stomach, I felt sympathy for the widow. She lived inside these walls and would never go outside, mostly because our town and their rumors forced her into a life of isolation. When we reached upstairs, my friends made their way into one of the mini bedrooms, and at this point, I was feeling more comfortable being in the house, and got bold, and headed into one of the other rooms. When I walked in the room, I knew instantly that this must have been the master bedroom. Her bedroom. It was big for an older home. The moonlight shined in through the window, giving me enough light to see around the room. Near the entry of the room, there was a large walk-in closet, and there, still hanging on the racks, was some of the widow's clothes. Most of her items were still on the hangers, while the rest was now on the floor covered in dust, forgotten in time. I continued poking around the room, trying to find something that would give me a better indication about her life. I wanted to find something that gave me a better understanding of the life she lived, alone. Then I saw it there on the window ledge, a candle, or what was left to it. The elders used to say that the widow would light a candle in her upstairs bedroom window every night, in hopes to guide her husband who was lost at sea home. My own grandmother told me that there wasn't a night that went by that there wasn't a candle burning in that window. This was a tradition that most fishermen wives would do when their husbands were out to sea fishing. As I stood there taking in this scene, I felt a cold shiver go down my spine, and for a moment it felt like all the air in the room was sucked away. I gasped for my breath, and found myself unable to catch it. Then the cold dissipated, and I was able to breathe again. I convinced myself that anxiety and panic got the best of me, and it wasn't until I was older that I realized what it could have actually been. The sound of a squeaky floorboard in the stairs pierced through the silence of the house. It was the sound you would hear when someone was walking up or down the stairs. Panic started to set in, because I thought my friends were sneaking off without me, as some sort of stupid prank. I rushed out of the bedroom, and made my way to the stairs landing, only there wasn't anyone there. I listened for a moment, and everything was deafening silent again. I yelled out, "Real funny, guys," in which one of my friends replied, "What's funny?" from the bedroom at the end of the hall. Hairs on the back of my neck started to stand. I realized that none of my friends had gone downstairs, and reassured myself that this house is old, and it was probably just that, old. I made my way down to the bedroom that they were all hanging out in. I could hear them laughing. When I got to the room, I asked them what's so funny, but before anyone could answer, I saw one of my friends was wearing an old-fashioned bonnet. I told them to knock it off, and put it back where he found it. I then told them that it wasn't funny, rather disrespectful to touch that isn't theirs, especially when the person is dead. As my friends were putting it back, I heard it again. The sound of someone on the stairs, only this time we all heard it. A lump started to form in my mouth, and I tried to speak up but my voice cracked. Then one of my friends bawled out, "Who's there?" All of us waited for someone to reply. I think we were all hoping it was one of our parents, coming to scold us out for staying out so late, and for coming into the house when we were all told not to. We waited for what seemed like hours for a reply that never came. One of my friends said it was getting late, and that we should get home before the sun came up. We all nodded in agreement, and started to walk towards the stairs. Although it was a little faster than a walk, as we got to the stairs we all froze in place. The door at the opposite end of the hallway started to slowly creak open. None of us wanted to hang around to see who or what opened the door, so we started to rush down over the stairs. We were all almost to the bottom, when there was a crashing noise behind us. When I turned around, one of my friends had fallen through the rotten stairs. Half of his body was still above, the other half in the hole. A group of us rushed to his aid, and quickly hauled him out of the hole he had fallen through. We then quickly started running towards the front door. Before we left the house, I took one last look behind me, and I swear I saw her there standing at the top of the stairs looking at us. I didn't stop to take a second look. I just squeezed my way through the door back into the front yard, pushing the door closed as I got out. We started to run away from the house as quick as possible, but my friend who had fallen through the stairs was limping. Myself and one of my other friends ran back, and between the both of us we managed to help him move quickly. We ran through the gate that was once iron, and started to head down the street to the safety of my house. One of my friends stopped and turned around to face the house, and slowly lifted his left hand and extended his index finger to point back towards the widow's house. As he did this, we all saw what he was pointing at. There in the upstairs window, in the room that I was standing in 10 minutes prior to this, the candle's flame was flickering in the window. The next day was the first day in my life that I was grounded. My parents had found out that my friends and I had gone into the house that they told us to stay away from. They wouldn't have found out. Only my friend who went through the stairs had to explain to his mother how he broke his ankle. Thinking back to that night, however, we are thankful that that was the worst thing that happened, when it could have gone entirely different. Flash forward 15 years later, the house still stands at the end of my street. Despite multiple storms and weathering, the house refuses to fall. I personally believe that evil is what keeps it together. The elders who once told us the stories about the widow have all passed away, leaving behind another generation to tell the stories in their place. I feel like my parents every time I tell my own kids to stay away from it, only I don't tell them about the mold and the falling down walls. I'm honest with them, and I tell them about the night I saw the widow.